Thank you, Mr. Hunter, and thanks to John Hamray, leader of this great institution, for the invitation. I have a great fondness for CSIS for kind of an interesting and perhaps peculiar reason. It was just the only time I was ever here, I don't know if you know this, was down there in the lobby where I set my field crew up to interview two of the finest scholars we have in D.C., Bonnie Glaser and Michael Green. And that was for my Crouching Tiger documentary series. And I was struck at how profound Bonnie and Michael were in talking about the China challenge. What I'd love to do for you today is talk about the manufacturing and defense industrial base and this historic effort that's gone under the Department of Defense and President Trump. And what I want to do in order to come to that topic is I want to start at the 30,000-foot level and try to offer some perspective on how this particular effort fits into the broader grand strategy of the Trump administration in terms of dealing with both economic and defense issues. So let me start by observing that some of our greatest presidents are best remembered for short but profound maxims that both guided their policies and led to some of their greatest successes. If you think about William McKinley, one of President Trump's favorite presidents, in the 1896 campaign, his campaign slogan was patriotism, protection, and prosperity. And it was that slogan that led to strong tariffs and sound money policy and to a profound realignment of the Republican Party under McKinley, as well as what was the catalyst for very strong economic growth. And if that sounds a little bit familiar, you may have been paying attention to what's been going on the last couple of years. You have, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, walk softly, carry a big stick. We moved in his administration from what was essentially a Coast Guard into a global naval power. Of course, the gold standard in maxims would be Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. Out of that came a reversal of a decline in the defense budget, a Star Wars initiative, and basically the demise of the Soviet Union. And so we come to this great president, Donald J. Trump. In December of 2017, as part of the national security strategy, President Trump introduced the maxim that economic security is national security. Economic security is national security. And if you think about everything the Trump administration has been doing in terms of economic and defense policy, you understand that this maxim really is the guiding principle. If you think about, for example, tax cuts, corporate tax cuts, which essentially spur investment and therefore lead to greater innovation. That helps both our economy and our national security. If you think about deregulation under one fine OMB director, Mick Mulvaney, he's been leading a tremendous effort to reduce the regulations that were put in place by the Obama administration. From a pure economic point of view, a lot of people associate supply-side economics purely with tax cuts, but the more nuanced, sophisticated, and accurate way of thinking about supply-side economics is to also consider things like how deregulation is a pure supply-side benefit, where you lower the costs of firms, you make them more globally competitive, and you get a twofer there, which is essentially growth in a non-inflationary way, which is the best kind of growth there is. Unleashing the energy sector, ending the war on coal is in the same spirit of that kind of beneficial supply side effect, where you get your manufacturers more competitive globally, and you put more purchasing power in the hands of American consumers so that you get that kind of benefit. Steel and aluminum tariffs. Steel and aluminum tariffs. What has that done? What it hasn't done is the gloom and doom of the conventional, traditional economics profession, where tariffs are bad. What tariffs have done in this case, from day one, the day one that they were announced, we saw a flood of new investment and expenditures in capital equipment in that industry. Day one, Century Aluminum, $150 million new investment in plant in Kentucky. Day one, U.S. Steel opening new boilers. And we've had since that point in time not just domestic companies investing here inside our borders, but also foreign investment coming in so that we can make steel and aluminum with American hands. So I'm just halfway there in terms of this. If you look at Buy American, Hire American policies, these are the two simple rules of President Trump. This is actually the equity we have in my office, the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, the equity for Buy American. And we've seen, for example, at the Department of Transportation, a radical change in the amount of waivers that were given out needlessly and wantonly during the previous administration. Now those waivers have gone from a flood to a mere trickle. And so what you do when you do that is in combination of steel and aluminum tariffs and Buy American policies using taxpayer dollars, you strengthen the manufacturing and defense industrial base. If you go to trade policy, if you think about the Section 301 investigation, I mean, this is brilliant. We have, in my judgment, the finest United States trade representative we've had in our history. Although I like to joke with Bob Lighthizer that he shouldn't get a big head about it because the USTR has only been around since the 60s, so you got to kind of put that in context. But doing that Section 301 investigation, that was a power that was laying dormant for decades. Ambassador Lighthizer brought that. The way the White House works is that the President says we need to get this done. How do we do it? This is the way we were able to now protect our technologies and intellectual property from Chinese predation. And it's been tremendously successful at that. The report that the USTR did on the 301 is something that I think is required reading for everybody in this country, because it lays out chapter and verse how there are the many different ways that China goes after our technology. And of course, on trade policy, I mean, let's think about this. A lot of people in this room likely criticized the President early on for his tough stance on trade. You can't change the Korea deal. Don't mess with NAFTA. That's too risky. But that tough talk, backed up by tough action, has resulted in landmark restructuring of two of the worst. We have basically three worst trade deals in history. The Korea deal, not an absolute number, but by its impact on the auto sector. China into the WTO, and NAFTA in 1994. Okay? 2 out of 3 we've been able to renegotiate in what I like to call Trump time. Trump time. What does that mean? It means that this USTR, Bob Lighthizer, was able to renegotiate NAFTA in a fifth of the time it would normally take. And the whole essence of NAFTA, the new NAFTA, USMCA, is a provision to bring domestic content back on shore and share the fruits of that assembly and supply chain with our neighbor to the south and our neighbor to the north. A deal which renegotiated actually strengthens all three countries and strengthens, again, the manufacturing and defense industrial base. So you can see how the grand strategy of this president really feeds into this whole idea. This is a man who wakes up every day and thinks about how to put men and women back to work, particularly men and women who work with their hands in our manufacturing base to rebuild our communities. And guess what? It's working. If you look at every single economic indicator, every single one is up. When the president, we didn't even have to wait for him to get elected, okay, or for him to get inaugurated. The day he was elected, business optimism and consumer optimism jumped up. And it's gone straight up since. It's at historic levels. And now it's reflected in the data. We've got historically low unemployment, 3.7%. We have rising wages for a change. We have record low unemployment among blacks, Hispanics, and women. And guess what? The rising wages are disproportionately being shared by the lower portions of the income stream. The deplorables, the Trump voters, the people who voted this man into office. And my favorite statistic, and my best measure of success of this administration, I remember during the campaign, on the stump, debating the Clinton economic advisors who said, nah, we can never do better than 2%, and all those people who left the workforce are never coming back, they just don't have this, whatever. Those are the discouraged workers. One of the most interesting days I had on the campaign trail was the day we got news of a study from the Federal Reserve. It came out, I don't even know when it came out, but it was like 1 out of 4 people, prime age workers, 25 to 54, out of the workforce. It's crazy. What have we done? What has this president done? He's put over 1 million people, 1 million of those people back into the workforce, the so-called discouraged workers, the people who were sitting on couches with the shades drawn with no hope in their life, are back in the workforce. And so what's going on here with this grand strategy is not just quantities of jobs. It's quality and a fundamental restructuring of our economy back to a strong manufacturing and industrial base whereby people can work with their hands with dignity and earn a decent wage and rebuild their communities. And this is something that President Obama never understood. And I'm not coming late to this party. This is something during the Obama administration I repeatedly said publicly on TV and in articles. President Obama, who wants to claim credit for this Trump economy, okay? This is somebody who, years ago, I said this. I said that this president, Obama, did not understand the difference between a cyclical short-run downturn that you might be able to fix with Keynesian stimulus and long-term fundamental structural problems related to high corporate taxes, overregulation, and bad trade deals. And guess what? Because he didn't understand that, the only thing that grew during the Obama administration was the deficit, the debt. It took us from the birth of our republic to 2008 to run up a debt of $10 trillion. It took Barack Obama 8 years to double that. And as he was doubling it with Keynesian fiscal stimulus, he was bloating the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve in a dangerous way. So please, this whole notion that somehow he could claim credit for that. And the other thing that President Obama never understood was this concept that economic security is national security. And nowhere was this more evident in his policy towards arms sales to our partners and allies. I was blessed to be part of a large team that worked on 2 reforms hand in hand that were announced, the conventional arms transfer policy and the unmanned aerial systems policy, which basically liberalized our ability to sell weapons systems to our partners and allies. This is a policy that Obama opposed, not on his moral high, not on the moral high ground, but rather on his high horse. He just didn't see the chessboard. But let's think about this. Let's think about how this works for economic security as national security. If we are able to sell defense systems to our allies and partners, what does that do? It makes that partner stronger. It makes the region where that partner is more stable. And most important to me, having gone through the Vietnam era and watched Afghanistan and Iraq, most important to me, there's fewer American boots on the ground. At the same time, from an economic security point of view, that's more jobs right here. Good jobs at good wages. I'll give you an example. Case of the F-16. This is why we need the CAT policy. This president, Donald J. Trump, with a different attitude, was able to consummate a sale of F-16s to Bahrain. What did this do? It helped expand the production line at Fort Worth, Texas. It led to a new facility in Greenville, South Carolina. It reactivated. Here's the thing. Here's what people don't understand. It's not the big factories where stuff is assembled where the action is. It's in the supply chain. When you reactivate that supply chain, you mobilize 400 suppliers in 41 states. That's what it's all about. That's what the USMCA is all about, getting back that supply chain. And so this CAT policy, this UAS policy, is one of the purest expressions of economic security is national security. And so too is what we're going to talk about now, which is the Defense Industrial Base assessment effort that went on. That's the cover of the report that you can see to the right of that smaller chart there. What this was an expression of the first president since Eisenhower to think and act strategically about the defense industrial base. What this is the first whole of government assessment ever of the defense industrial base. It was an effort that started with the inspiration of the White House with Executive Order 13806 back in July of 2017. My deputy here, Alex Gray, had a lot to do with that, and he did a wonderful job on it. And the inspiration was turned into perspiration over at the Defense Department by Eric Tuning, Ellen Lord, Brendan Grignan, with the help of Pat Shanahan, working with 16 different working groups across the interagency, 300 subject matter experts, looking at 9 traditional sectors: aircraft, shipbuilding, and 6 cross-cutting sectors. What does that mean? It's machine tools where you need them across the sectors: electronics, software engineering. And what we found in terms of the big picture punchline of that report was almost 300 gaps and vulnerabilities in the sub-tiers of our supply chain. The sub-tiers of our supply chain. The problems we face aren't at the assembly level, the final plants, whether it's in defense or whether it's in the auto industry. It's where do you have a vital supply chain? And so if you take something like the F-35, to give this some content, you have a 7-tier deep supply chain, and there might be some widget or component in that 5th tier that you need to make sure that that production line can not only continue producing, but expand and accelerate production should we need it in a surge. And so if you have a single source making that's in danger, a fragile market, if you have labor shortages associated with that because you don't have the skills at the trade level or at the STEM level, or if you're dependent on foreigners for that, that would be a vulnerability. So what are some of these things that we have? If you think about what we call single points of failure, we only have one company that can make shafts for submarines, right? We have only one depot that can make turrets for tanks. We have only one company that can supply rocket fuel. We have space infrared detectors for missile defense. Again, a single source for that. Here's something for you. We have 72 different needs for military-grade impregnated carbon, for filtration systems, for biological, chemical, and nuclear applications. And we've got fragility there as well. The labor gaps are equally difficult at both the STEM end and the trade skill end. At the STEM end, we have a shortage of people that can work in electronic controls. We have a shortage of software engineers. We have a shortage of nuclear engineering personnel. This is frightening in a way. I mean, think about this. You need to modernize and keep in ready shape your nuclear arsenal. Do we have enough people who are studying in that field in order to sustain us moving forward? These are the things we were looking at in this report. At the other end, trade skills, welders, pipe fitters, machinists for shipbuilding or combat vehicles. So there are these large labor gaps. And then one of the biggest things that this report uncovered is this very high degree of foreign dependency. This is part and parcel a product of the globalization of our economy, the globalization of our supply chain. So you have something like the lowly, now high-tech tent, where you have sophisticated fabric you need for that, and we can't make it here in America. You have rechargeable batteries for the warfighter out in the field. And we have virtually all of the battery production migrating elsewhere now. And we have the lithium that's used for some of this is coming under the control of foreign powers. Printed circuit boards, machine tools have all migrated to Asia. And then you have critical materials like beryllium, tungsten, and the rare earths, which we need for all sorts of applications, whether it's sophisticated electronic systems for our space or aircraft systems, or what DOD euphemistically calls, I love this, energetics, right? That's the stuff that blows up, right? Munitions for our missiles. These are all the things, and what's again alarming, and this is why this report's so important, because it does sound alarms. What's so alarming about this is one of the conclusions of this report, one of the important conclusions, is that these vulnerabilities are not random in some cases. They are the direct effect of strategic rivals, principally China, targeting somewhere in our supply chain or some sector and basically making that vulnerability either existing or worse. So I guess the question is, how did we get to this place? How did we get to a place where the greatest military power in the world faces gaps, close to 300 gaps and vulnerabilities in its defense industrial base? And the answer comes from the report in the form of what's referred to as these 5 macro forces that bear down on our defense industrial base. And what are they? Well, the first one, budget sequestration. Again, you can lay that squarely at the blame of the previous administration and the Congress, because there was no concept of this idea that economic security is national security, much less any idea that the world's a dangerous place. And so what happens when you randomly just cut off the flow of dollars to the Defense Department? Well, one of the things that we've seen in the report is the crippling of design competitions. These are the things you need to develop kind of the next generation of weapon systems. I mean, think about this. The only thing that has kept us dominant and free since World War II is the offset strategy. Right? We've been able, through the beauty of this country and the beauty of the people who work here, through our innovative and creative capabilities, to always leapfrog ahead of whatever threat we're facing. But when you squeeze the defense dollars and you can't do the design competitions, you not only don't do the design competitions, but the people who would otherwise be working on the design competitions migrate out of the defense industry into other applications. Ground vehicles. This is fascinating to me. This is subtle stuff. It's like, if you think about the ground vehicles we use, they look a lot like B-52s, right? With some tweaks, right? The squeezing of the defense budget forced the Army to pursue a strategy of incremental change to the existing technology rather than continually moving ahead with what the next generation of ground vehicle would look like. And again, what you did through that incremental change is you sidelined the people who were important in the design area, and you lost an edge. Inefficient procurement. Think about this as a second macro force. 6 years to develop the F-4. 22 years to develop the F-22. I think they named the F-22 after the number of years that it takes to develop that thing. A third major macro force has to do with the decline of the manufacturing base itself, due to the forces of globalization. And as this report points out adequately, points out alarmingly, due to the industrial policies, the unfair trade practices of our economic competitors, our so-called allies that we're supposed to protect, as well as the strategic rivals, again, principally China. This report calls out China for its strategies of economic regression. I will talk shortly more about that. And DOD clearly views China as an identified threat to America's defense industrial base. Nothing could be clearer than that in this report. But this is a very different view. This is a very different view that DOD and other elements of this government have than the Wall Street and the global Wall Street bankers and the globalist elites. Let's think about this now. Consider the shuttle diplomacy that's now going on by a self-appointed group of Wall Street bankers and hedge fund managers between the U.S. and China. As part of a Chinese government influence operation, these globalist billionaires are putting a full-court press on the White House in advance of the G20 in Argentina. The mission of these unregistered foreign agents, that's what they are, they're unregistered foreign agents, is to pressure this president into some kind of deal. Now, 2 points have to be made abundantly clear about this. First of all, President Donald J. Trump has done an incredible job on trade. He has had the courage and wisdom to stand up to the globalist elites, to stand up to the countries of the world that are engaging in unfair trade practices, non-reciprocal trade, high tariffs, high non-tariff barriers, using the United States as the piggy bank of the world, and running up a trade deficit every year because they do that of over $500 billion, which is a pure transfer of wealth abroad. Jobs, factories, money. That's like a reverse mortgage on this country. Donald J. Trump has done an amazing job of addressing that issue, and he didn't need the help of Wall Street. He didn't need the help of Goldman Sachs, and he doesn't need it now. And here's the most important point. When these unpaid foreign agents engage in this kind of diplomacy, so-called diplomacy, all they do is weaken this president and his negotiating position. No good can come of this. If there is a deal, if and when there is a deal, it will be on President Donald J. Trump's terms, not Wall Street terms. But if Wall Street is involved and continues to insinuate itself into these negotiations, there will be a stench around any deal that's consummated, because it will have the imprimatur of Goldman Sachs and Wall Street. So I would urge these unpaid foreign agents to stand down on this issue. No good can come of it. If they want to do good, then spend their billions in Dayton, Ohio, in the factory towns of America, where we need a rebirth of our manufacturing base and an end to the opioid crisis, which they helped create by offshoring our production. Now, to convince them and to hopefully enlighten you further about the strategies of economic aggression that DOD references in its report, I want to walk through this chart over here, which is basically a chart. It's in the spirit of one picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, one chart basically encapsulates the entire industrial policy of the People's Republic of China. If you understand this chart, you not only understand what China is doing to us in the world, you will also understand why it's so difficult to undo what they are doing to us. And so, what you have on this chart at the top is the 6 strategies of economic aggression they pursue. This is intuitive. This should ring a very harmonious note with you. You will understand this immediately. What do? They protect their markets. They attack global markets. They go around the world trying to secure resources in places like the Congo for cobalt or Chile for copper. They seek to dominate traditional manufacturing, which what I would say is pretty much check that box at this point. And most importantly, the last 2 columns are the 301, Section 301 problems. Column 5 is to acquire the technologies and intellectual property of the world by any means necessary for the purpose in column 6 of capturing the emerging industries of the future. Artificial intelligence, robotics, everything in between, the kinds of industries going forward where our sons and daughters and their children will find the good jobs at good wages in the future economy. And then the left column going down, I call it my Paul Simon chart, the 50 ways basically to leave the American economy behind. These consist of more than 50 acts, policies, and practices, many of them documented in that historic USTR report that I referenced earlier. Over 50 ways that China basically pursues its strategies of aggression. High tariffs. 25% on autos versus 2.5% here. High non-tariff barriers. Things like having indigenous standards for products so that we can't sell into their market. Currency manipulation. There's a great debate now whether China's manipulating their currency. I'll tell you 2 things about that. First, what we know is that since March of 2018, when tariffs were imposed on China, we saw a fairly dramatic drop in their currency. Who knows if that's a coincidence? But what is undisputed is that from about 2003 to 2014, China is generally regarded by both the right and the left, by the Peterson Institute, Economic Policy Institute, you couldn't have two institutes more far apart, that China was the worst currency manipulator of any country in the world. Cyber theft and traditional espionage go hand in hand in China. Forced technology transfer, and I'm not just talking about a company going over to China and having to surrender their current technology in order to have access to the market. It's much worse than that. Much worse. Now it's like, okay, you want in our market, you also got to bring your R&D over. And when you bring your R&D over, you're basically bringing over the rest of your manufacturing, and you're basically leaving your country behind. That's what China does. Massive subsidies, state-owned enterprises conquering the world, predatory debt financing. I mean, did anybody's head spin around 360 degrees when China foreclosed on the port in Sri Lanka and took control of that? Did anybody notice that? Malaysia is a colony. Sri Lanka is a military outpost. This is what's going on here. The list goes on, and here's the point. Here's the point. If you think about the art of the deal with China, even if you take 25 of those things off that list, even if, and they're all structural, right? This is not about buying more soybeans or more coal. This is not about that. This is structural change. Even if you take 25 of those off, you still have 25 left, and that probably would be still enough to hurt us. But there's other difficulties here. We went on a trip, road trip. Let's go to Beijing and negotiate with the Chinese. So we sit across the table with the Chinese team, right? And it's like we put our demands down. They were like tough demands. They were a long list of demands, like all this structural stuff. It kind of looked like the chart here, right? And so what do we hear? Well, we don't engage in cyber theft. We're the biggest victim of cyber theft. Oh, we don't force technology transfer. That's not our. I mean, how do you have a deal with somebody if they won't even acknowledge your concern? I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland. But here's another problem. I mean, think about this. What's the difference between the Soviet Union and the Chinese model? I mean, they're both like state-run economies, right? State-controlled economies. China may have a little bit more market stuff in it, more a little capitalist element, but at the end of the day, they're state-directed. Soviet economy was a mess. How does China be profitable? You know the answer, right? They steal stuff. They take the technology. If you're able to take the technology of the world and avoid the 10, 20, or 30% R&D expenditures that other companies have to spend every year, don't you think you're going to have a cost advantage? That's the difference. That's the difference. And so if China were to say, well, we're going to stop doing all that stuff, it would be left with an economy that would effectively lose its edge. And I believe that there's deep concern in China that if they make the kind of structural reforms that are necessary for them to be reasonable, fair, and responsible citizens of the global trading system, they won't be able to compete. The biggest problem is the trust issues. The trust issues. I got somewhere, the beautiful thing about working at the White House is you can like ask for stuff. So I said, okay, give me like all the things, all the instances where China has agreed to something and then not kept their promise. And I get like 5 pages back of stuff going back 30 years. It's like it's frightening. I mean, Bonnie Glaser, right? She knows all about the South China Sea things, Scarborough Shoals, how we tried to make a deal with them and we thought we had a deal and now China owns Scarborough Shoals. Of course, coming into the World Trade Organization in 2001, they're serial violators of every single principle of the World Trade Organization. The one deal we made with them after Mar-a-Lago, the one substantive deal was like the beef deal. They're going to buy more American beef. Where's the beef? Where's the beef? The game that China has played, and they played people in the Bush administration like a violin, is to do the tap dance of economic dialogue. That's all they want to do. They want to get us to the bargaining table, sound reasonable, and talk their way while they keep having their way with us. And this is, I mean, look, here's all you need to know when you think about the prospect of a deal. Okay? We had a high-ranking member of the Chinese government agree with Barack Obama on two things back in 2015. Two things, okay? The Chinese official agreed to no militarization of the South China Sea. Within 2 years, those artificial islands were armed to the teeth. The second thing that official agreed to was to stop hacking American businesses. The weird thing about that, I remember watching that press conference and watch President Obama joke about the fact that he wasn't going to crack down on China's stealing all our weapon systems, which they have done with aplomb. I mean, every single weapon system, pretty much, they've hacked into. I mean, the Chengdu fighter is basically a clone combo of the F-35 and the F-22, and we can't even afford to build F-22s, and meanwhile they're grinding them out like crazy in Chengdu, ergo the Chengdu fighter. So Obama jokes, he goes, everybody hacks defense, but the Chinese have promised to stop hacking at least our businesses. Yeah, well, that lasted about 6 months, and now the U.S. government will tell you unequivocally that those hacks are back up, they're serious, and they're coming to get us. So the point is that if you think about a deal, it's been great having the President and Ambassador Lighthizer work with the Koreans. We were able to renegotiate. We're able to renegotiate with Canada and Mexico in a deal, and we can trust them. We are entering into negotiations with Japan. We are in the process of negotiating with Europe. We're negotiating with everybody around the world, people that we can trust if there's a deal. But when it comes to China, it's sui generis. So I would again say, Wall Street, get out of those negotiations. Go to Dayton, Ohio. Bring your Goldman Sachs money to Dayton, Ohio, and invest in America. The President of the United States does not need shuttle diplomacy. What we need is to rebuild our manufacturing and defense industrial base. That's what this President is doing. And the beauty of this report, okay, we like to do things differently in the Trump administration. This is a different culture. The culture of Washington is to do a report, hand it in, and go on to your next report. That's not what we did here. The day that report was handed in by Pat Shanahan in the Oval Office to the President, DOD and other agencies of government were already moving forward to fill those vulnerabilities. The day that report was handed in, we signed 2 Defense Production Act Title III orders that would help a couple of small companies in that fragile supply chain, help us in things like the future Navy unmanned systems, right? We have initiatives for the National Defense Stockpiling Program to help with critical materials issue. We have an effort ongoing to modernize the organic industrial base. We're developing with the Department of Energy a Title III style, DPA style funding mechanism to deal with some of our vulnerabilities in energy and nuclear. And this administration is working tirelessly to fix those gaps and vulnerabilities. And this effort really is one of the purest expressions of the principle that economic security is national security. We will strengthen America's manufacturing and defense industrial base. In the process, we'll create jobs, we'll build factories, and better protect our homeland. So I salute the Department of Defense for its yeoman effort in this. I salute this President for having the courage and the vision, the grand strategic vision, to pursue the rebuilding of this country and this country's manufacturing and defense industrial base through broad-range efforts, of which this is a small but important part of. There's more work to do. One of the next things on our agenda is dealing with some of the infrastructure issues in the defense industrial base. But hopefully we can come back at some point and talk about that. So now I'll turn it back to Andrew, and I guess he's going to put me on the griddle. Is that that thing? Thank you for your patience on this.